Fei-Fei Li, the godmother of AI, founder of a $5 billion company, on the cover of Time magazine, sounds like an impressive career. I'm Dr. Becky Sage, and this is my deep dive into Fei-Fei Li and World Labs. We're now on episode 4. We've already discussed her early years as a teenage Chinese immigrant, her aptitude for science, and her rise as one of the most prominent figures in AI. In the last episode, we discussed her company, World Labs. And today, we are going to start to look at some of the controversies and some of the ethical questions that might surround this business. Fei-Fei Li talks a lot about human-centric AI. In fact, she's known for it. But how will this apply to her business? It is normal for founders to have a tension inside of them. We've already seen this in all the businesses that we've done deep dives for in the past, and I see it all the time in the founders that I work with. I felt it myself when I was running my own business, and as I work across the technology ecosystem. You take risks, and some of those risks are going to lead to unhappy people, but the question is, are some of those risks taking it too far? Sometimes as a founder you make decisions, or always as a founder really, under pressure, on the verge of burnout. Sometimes you find yourself in echo chambers, and sometimes you are blinkered, just focused on that North Star. It's no different for Fei-Fei Li. In most of the previous deep dives I've done, I've focused predominantly on the business itself and then the kind of founder's journey through that. But World Labs is a little bit different because it's such a new business, but also because it is so built on Fei-Fei Li's journey and her North Star vision. Fei-Fei Li has her hands on the reins of this business, of World Labs, so it is her leadership that sets the tone. Of course, alongside the other co-founders as well. Could I find any red flags? Before we get into this, do you think it's possible to build a $5 billion AI company and still be truly ethical? And I want nuanced answers to this, not just like emotionally driven, no, we hate AI, or yes, we love AI. Like really, what are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've made it all the way here to episode 4, I know you are ready to subscribe to this channel. I'll give you 3 seconds to do it. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's move on. The first controversy. Did Fei-Fei Li steal ideas? The general consensus seems to be no on this one, but in February 2017, Professor Yang Wen publicly accused Fei-Fei Li of academic plagiarism. And honestly, like, having been in academic worlds, this is the worst of the worst. Like, you could accuse people of so many other things. In fact, I know people who have been accused of like abusing people, of lots of horrible things, and like the only thing that actually gets them in trouble is scientific plagiarism. So what he alleged is that Fei-Fei Li's dissertation, doctoral dissertation, her PhD work that we talked about in a previous episode, failed to cite his foundational works on the topic. And she primarily cited people that we've already talked about: Geoffrey Hinton, Yann LeCun, Kaneko Fukushima. Wang stated that he'd sent emails and he'd filed a report with MIT, and when I read this I was like, what have MIT got to do with it? Because she was never at MIT. So Fei-Fei Li was kind of the most high-profile person in this report, but the actual issue was something called the HMax model. Wang claims that his Cresceptron architecture, which he developed in the 1990s, was the true model for hierarchical neural networks, and the one that was used in computer vision, so relevant to Fei-Fei Li's work. He claims that the MIT's HMax model, which was, the development was led by Tommaso Poggio, copied his work. This was somebody that Fei-Fei Li collaborated with, and so she also caught some shrapnel on this one. But actually it does go a little bit deeper than that, because Yang Wen doesn't only like formalize this complaint, he wrote a Facebook letter to Fei-Fei Li. I mean, okay. Sorry, I don't mean to mock it, because I do think it's clearly a serious point for him, and he does make some interesting points actually that I think are really worth listening to. Probably one of the most scathing things he asked directly to Fei-Fei Li was, in your PhD thesis 2005, did you plagiarize Chryceptron for your entire approach. Now, of all of this, none of the complaints seem to have been taken seriously at all. And honestly, the most information you can find on it is on Reddit. But one of my questions is, if this was the case, why wait till 2017 to post the letter? This PhD report came out in 2005. I'm guessing it's because Google Cloud's chief scientist was far more important than a 20-something PhD student that she'd been 12 years earlier. Also, the Chinese Communist Party was mentioned a lot in this letter. So, there's potentially kind of geopolitical things going on here as well. Don't forget, Fei-Fei Li was working for Google at the time. But to me, I think one of the most interesting parts of Yu Yangwen's letter is the part about how ImageNet was myopic. He said, "Your ImageNet competition seems to be a race of both human resource and machine resource, where teams could try and fully take advantage of the task limitations on the ImageNet tests. The ImageNet competitions seem not scientific, non-developmental, myopic, and not general purpose. The contests were designed to bypass the major fundamental bottleneck problems in AI." And to be clear, it would be pretty audacious to totally plagiarize this work. And like I said, most people on Reddit seem to think that this is more about kind of maybe not appropriately citing something. But I also think it could be, that narrow perspective of being a PhD student, who you're exposed to, what your echo chamber looks like, what is it you've got access to. Sure, your job is to try and find as many sources out there as possible, and maybe she missed the mark on that slightly. Do you think I'm being too kind? Do you think she plagiarized? I don't know. Because the reality is, isn't research built off the shoulders of giants? This is how the whole scientific industry works. Clearly in hindsight, she would have benefited from giving a citation to Chryceptron. Yes, Chryceptron, say it louder, so everyone's heard of this. But do I think this is a real red flag on Fei-Fei Li's character? No. Do I think it perhaps highlights something that I think is very prevalent across the industry, which is putting people on pedestals? Yes, I think maybe it does. At the end of the day, everybody who's out there doing research is trying to do their best research, and nobody's superhuman, but I think people have put Fei-Fei Li on a pedestal, and maybe that's what then puts her in the firing line. There's nothing here that says that she's published anything incorrect through ImageNet, and it just seems that there is a citation issue. Now, if, as he says, ImageNet seems to not be a scientific competition, does that even matter if actually what happened out of the back of it enabled the development of something? Certainly from a technical perspective, I don't think so. Because let's face it, the competition itself was just a mechanism to help get the data out there so more models could attempt to use it. And does this have anything to do with Fei-Fei Li as a founder of a business? Now, I do think it says something about her capabilities to move forward by being highly focused, by focusing on her end goals, by focusing on connecting to the right people who are going to help to get her there, and kind of ignoring some of the noise, which is what happened with this complaint. She had a very clear North Star, and she's played to her strengths all along. This story actually, I think, kind of just continues to strengthen the idea that she has an image of kind of maybe a little bit more typical founder, which maybe does differ a little bit from the picture that she paints of herself, which is more of that kind of obsessed researcher. The next story I want to tell you is one where I think that picture, that self-portrait, slipped a little. Perhaps we do start to see some of the tensions actually come to light. We see these two different sides of personality, something that we've seen very strongly in previous founders that we've looked at, especially Sam Altman. So let's talk about Project Maven. Now, you may have heard of Project Maven, but it may have been in a quite different context. Project Maven is actually a project that is now more associated with Palantir, but that's not how it began. It began when Google partnered with the US Department of Defense. as it was called then. They were using AI to help the Pentagon analyze drone videos. And I think this is a moment that brought ethics into tight focus for Fei-Fei Li. There's often a question amongst tech founders, like, would you work in defense? And honestly, that's a whole deep dive on its own. For many, it's a complete no-go area. But I have also seen the true meaning of using technology to defend individual freedoms. But when Google engaged with the Department of Defense for this project, there was significant backlash amongst employees. So much so, they actually gave up the contract with the Department of Defense, hence why Palantir are now doing it. If you think I should do a deep dive on Palantir, by the way, let me know in the comments below. Now, according to Fei-Fei Li, when she stood up in front of a packed room of Google employees to talk about this and talk about where they go next, she was asked a very important question by one of the employees. A question that I personally am dedicating my life to answer. The idea of an ethical framework. What does that mean exactly? Professor Li also acknowledges that this is a question that we should all be trying to answer. At least that's what she says in public. However, in practice, she is still fundamentally driven by her North Star. And I believe like a lot of what she does is to carve out, that unencumbered pathway towards doing the research that she wants to do, with answering the questions that she really wants to answer, that allow her to keep moving towards creating this spatial intelligence, this Cambrian explosion for robots, as we talked about in previous episodes. And in leaked emails from the time, and this is the time when she was working at Google, of course, she said, avoid at all costs any mention or implication of AI. Weaponized AI is probably one of the most sensitized topics of AI, if not the most. So that email kind of gave the impression that she cared more about how it looked and not the actual ethical issues that were at hand. If we contrast that to the polished PR statement where she said, I believe in human-centric AI to benefit people in positive and benevolent ways. It is deeply against my principles to work on any project that I think is to weaponize AI. It's hard to read this and think, like, if you're working on fundamental AI models, world models, or if you've worked on that underpinning technology, I mean, how can you possibly stop this from getting into the space of weaponized AI? And I think we should be able to do that, right? There should be governance around that. There should be some kind of Geneva Convention for weaponized AI. Absolutely, we need to call for these type of things. I'm going to be honest, like, I know some of the technologies that are out there. There's companies that are building things using AI, and spatial intelligence is like exactly where weaponized AI intersects. I know there's lots of other uses too. Anyone else getting slight Sheryl Sandberg vibes here? Like saying one thing but maybe doing something different? It's very much about perception. Actually, I've read Careless People, so I think it might be unfair to put Fei-Fei Li and Sheryl Sandberg into the same box. If you know, you know. If you don't, subscribe, because we'll be coming back to Careless People and the meta story very, very soon. Let me know in the comments if you want to see that deep dive on meta. Back to Fei-Fei Li. One of the things that maybe differentiates her, or certainly that's what it seems like on the outside, is that despite kind of going through this slight kind of controversy, some contradictions there between what she was saying and what she actually meant, Fei-Fei Li didn't just like sit around and go, okay, well, let's let this blow over, say all the right things, and soon we can just move on. She actually stopped and did something. According to Wired, she extended her sabbatical at Google in order to write their AI principles. And those principles in 2019, which is like the first set of Google AI principles, said, we believe that AI should, 1, be socially beneficial, 2, avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias, 3, be built and tested for safety. 4, be accountable to people. 5, incorporate privacy design principles. 6, upholds high standards of scientific excellence. 7, be made available for uses that accord with these principles. In addition, Google will not design or deploy AI for technologies that cause overall harm, weapons, or technologies that cause injury, surveillance violating internationally accepted norms, and purposes that contravene international law and human rights. Those principles stood strong at least for a year or two. They have been revised now, and again, this is not the time for it, but I do think we should have another look at that in future videos. But Google also now have a responsible AI toolkit too. Honestly, if you want me to get into all of this, do let me know in the comments. But also, you should probably follow me on Instagram or follow my shorts, because it's easier to do short reels on some of these things and get them out there quicker to you than making longer form videos. You can find me at Dr. Becky Sage. I've just realised I'm about to do a deep dive on Meta and I'm giving you my Instagram, and when you see my deep dive on Meta, you will know why that just feels like a lot of cognitive dissonance. So have principles and behaviours also been brought into World Labs? Wouldn't this be a great way for Fei-Fei Li to show that she really meant it when she stayed behind, that these principles actually had value to her and they weren't just an exercise for a PR purpose? So I went and I looked around World Labs and I was like, come on, this is Fei-Fei Li. Of course she's got principles. Like, she's done the Google thing. She's done Stanford HAI. Like, come on. Could I find any principles about the development of World Labs? No. And this was the part I really wanted to see. I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. Let's assume that this is just growing pains. It's early days, that these principles are going to emerge very soon. One thing she has said over and over again is that AI must augment human capacity, not replace it. And she has said many things across different videos in her Substack that also indicate where her thinking is here. In her Substack manifesto that we discussed in an earlier episode, she said, "Extreme narratives of techno-utopia and apocalypse are abundant these days, but I continue to hold a more pragmatic view. AI is developed by people, used by people, and governed by people. It must always respect the agency and dignity of people. Its magic lies in extending our capabilities, making us more creative, connected, productive, and fulfilled." So is the AI that Fei-Fei Li is building respecting the agency and the dignity of people? What is she doing to ensure that it does, especially once it's in the hands of end users? I want to move on now to discussing kind of a pattern that I've seen as I've read more and more about Fei-Fei Li. So when I was researching her stance, I went through several different areas where we know there are issues across the AI ecosystem. And I could just kind of go through each one of those, but rather than going into detail on each one, and I mean, I've done some of this on the OpenAI video as well, which is not purely focused on OpenAI. Some of that is more general issues with AI overall. But here I wanted to share a clear pattern that was coming out. And this pattern was becoming clearer and clearer the more I researched. In general, Fei-Fei Li shows a general concern for the most of the issue areas that I looked into. There are some that she keeps completely quiet on, and the way I read that is, la 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 la, I'm not listening, that's getting in the way of my North Star. Or shall we say it's the founder blinkers, maybe. It's very clear that human-centric remains the stock answer on anything to do with ethics and AI. It's very clear that human-centric remains the stock answer on anything to do with ethics and AI. And I mean, I obviously genuinely believe that she does not want to be the cause of harm to people. Like, I do believe that she doesn't want to be responsible for human death and destruction. But that's a pretty low bar if we're talking about ethics, although it does show where we're at in terms of AI companies. Having listened to her talk, I think that really what remains clear is that she intends to stay in her lane, and she hopes other people do the same too. She wants to focus on her piece of the puzzle, her North Star, the thing that she's always been interested in. And she actively encourages other people to do other pieces of the puzzle. And maybe some of that is with the view that at some point in the future, all of those puzzle pieces come together, complete, and they make this vision of a human-centric, even ethical AI ecosystem, providing all these different benefits to humans and reaching her personal North Star. Although she's also very clear that she doesn't like hyperbole and she does not believe in the hyperbole on either side of the equation. She doesn't buy into this utopia and she doesn't buy into this existential threat either. She finds the catastrophizing unhelpful. This is something we've got in common. Fei-Fei Li, I'm always here for the nuanced discussions. Call me. Sure, like World Labs could stretch to my measly day rates. One thing I think where maybe we differ, and maybe my piece of the puzzle is different from her piece of the puzzle, is it's where we think the catastrophizing is unhelpful. So for me, I find it unhelpful because I think it takes away from the nuanced questions that will ultimately allow us to use and build AI responsibly. For her, it feels a little bit more like it's because it then takes away from her ability to stay single focused on her research outcomes that she has. And that stands in the way of her building models that will show the benefits that she wants to show with her work. It's a subtle but important difference. So as I've mentioned, Fei-Fei Li does seem to stop short when it comes to talking about many topics related to AI and ethics. And perhaps with World Labs, she's in a position where there's an inherent tension between her role as a founder and her self-identity as a humanist. Although with World Labs money, I honestly think she could be like one of the closest people, especially given her background, to actually solve some of the big issues, even as a call to action across the research landscape. And of course, there are some topics I would like to see her be louder on. Maybe she already considers herself to be doing this through the work of Stanford HAI, so perhaps she feels she doesn't need to address these issues directly. There are other people working on those things. So let's acknowledge that she has already founded initiatives that are about ethics and AI. She's also been very open about the fact that she has concerns with regard to AI and how it's used. So let's look at some of the areas that she avoids or kind of pivots from the question if people ask her about it. I think that can give us a bit more of a sense of where she's coming from. Probably the one where I feel like she's been the quietest, and perhaps one that I think is one of the most important. Everything seems important, right? And that's the energy and environmental impact of AI. She's clearly very aware of how compute-hungry world models are. That's why they need so much investment money. That's why they can't do it behind university walls. That's why they're researching in a company. However, she rarely talks about the energy and the environmental issue related to this head-on. But she did, in a Bloomberg interview, say, in order to train large models, we are seeing more and more need for power or energy. But nobody says these data centers have to be powered by fossil fuels. Innovation on the energy side will be part of this. Countries that need to build these big data centers also need to examine energy policy and industry. This is an opportunity for us to invest in and develop more renewable energy. She's staying in her lane and expecting others to step up. She's even asking governments to step up. She's a little more optimistic than me. But then, of course, there are several other things she doesn't address just with respect to environmental impact. Other resource use, the current state of data centers and their probable future, the impact on the communities and individuals, as well as the environmental cost. But in addition, and where I think she would be really well placed to speak, perhaps, or perhaps this is not where her expertise lie, but I think, why doesn't she discuss more the issue with focusing on large general models for AI? I mean, I get it, that's where she's come from, right? It was the exponential thinking. Why can't we be slower with our AI development? More deliberate, more focused? Why can't we build smarter, lower energy systems? Genuine questions, because these are genuine possible solutions to the way forward. And I know part of the answer to that is the private sector side of it. They're all in competition against each other. And now you've got investors on your back pushing you to move more quickly. But why? Dig a bit deeper. The thing I want to know is, like, couldn't some of this investment be a little more patient? Now we're getting into the way the whole investment ecosystem works, and that also probably needs to be disrupted a little bit. So, moving on, I have not found anywhere where Fei-Fei Li addresses the issue of data workers or sourcing of her data. Her work almost established the blueprint for how you get the original data and then how you get data workers to work with the data to make sure that it's prepared and moderated and therefore effective for the training of models. ImageNet is a well-known use case for Amazon Mechanical Turk. I think it's the first time I'm bringing up ImageNet in this video. If you haven't seen earlier videos and you want to know more about ImageNet, go back and watch episode 1. And Amazon Mechanical Turk has been shown to be exploitative when it comes to data workers. It doesn't exist anymore, but there are obviously other data workers, other companies that are used for this. So while she says agency, dignity, liberty are important values, she doesn't address how she ensures this happens in World Labs, or anything that happened in her earlier work. I mean, granted, there was less information about data workers and their exploitation in 2008, but she could look back and say, maybe they did, maybe they didn't get exploited in the development of ImageNet, but why not be open about this? A related topic that she also does not really address is copyright. Fei-Fei Li hasn't been cited directly in copyright lawsuits. However, there is what seems to be an open case between Evox and Stanford University. And initial hearings last year upheld the evidence that was presented. Evox claims that their images of cars were used in ImageNet, and importantly, there's a statement that says Stanford could have prevented third-party usage through access controls. Oh, sorry, third-party infringement through access controls. So there's still a prevailing sense that pure academic use cases are okay, that they fall under fair use policies. But I assume the third-party infringement is referring to the importance of ImageNet and the images within it to ultimately lead to commercial AI offerings. I find this area of the fair use argument really, really blurry. I think there are two solutions to figuring this out. The first one is time travel. Let's go back to the mid-2000s and just set the precedents, make the rules then, get everyone to agree to whatever it might mean, and then move forward. Alternatively, because at the end of the day, we can't untrain the models that have been trained using copyright data. So I think what we really need is a complete paradigm shift in the way that society and AI are structured and how they interplay amongst one another. At this point, I honestly don't know which one is harder, time travel or like shifting the paradigm. We can definitely set rules for moving forward from today, but what about where we are today? And even if we could like untangle the web of data and how it's used and where it came from and how it's getting used in the future and who's getting rich from it and who is getting exploited from it, the shift that we need to do in the coming years to now respond to it is also incredibly challenging. That is why I think as many people as possible need to be talking about this, need to be informed about it. So talking about where the data comes from, spatial computing and surveillance are inherently linked. And where is the data coming from to train world models in the first place? Sensors, videos from multiple angles. Fei-Fei Li has spoken about the need for human dignity and privacy, although she has also specifically refused to answer questions about where the data is coming from to train the World Labs models. One thing she does discuss is the use of 3D worlds generated by Marble being used as training data. Do you think this is the vision for how dignity might be maintained? And when it does come to dignity, we cannot ignore the ability of world models to be able to create extremely realistic deepfakes. Where are the guardrails to protect individuals from this? I'm not saying they're not there, I'm just asking where they are. There are also some topics that she consistently leans into. Of course, human-centric AI. And there are several catchphrases that she says over and over again, one of which is artificial intelligence is not artificial. She often suggests that this is a technology created by humans and that we all as humans have agency, and it's up to us all to have a voice in the development of AI. But it's really unclear how she expects everyone to have a voice in the development of AI, especially in a nuanced way. Her solution seems to be like whatever you do in life, you can still use AI. And as a user, you then get to be a contributor in some way. There's many reasons I don't think this is a satisfactory answer. And it is difficult to think about how might we give people more agency. We do need to, I also agree with that. And the other thing I agree with is something else she said, which is AI is a civilizational technology. As in, this is something that is totally restructuring our civilization. It is changing the way our world works. And just like cars, roads, houses, buildings, all of these things, they all become part of our day-to-day life, part of our infrastructure, part of how our living and our civilization is defined. AI is also in that picture. And therefore, she states that we need frameworks as we build AI. And I'm like, yes, I just feel wanky when I do that. The human-centric AI framework is developed by Stanford HAI. And this center, the Institute for Human-Centric AI at Stanford, is the biggest human-centered AI institution in the world delivering research, education, and policy. I talked a little bit more about that in previous episodes. It would make me feel so much better if she talked about how these frameworks were being implemented in world labs. Is she not like the perfect case study for this? If she can't do it, then how on earth would we expect any of the other big tech people to do it? This is where the optimism dwindles a little bit. Perhaps the most consistently passionate thing she talks about is NARE, the National Artificial Intelligence Research Resource. She firmly believes that public sector AI researchers require more resource in order to continue to innovate in the sector. And her World Labs co-founder, Justin Johnson, is very clear about the need for wonky projects in the AI space, which may ultimately lead to solving many of the topics we've discussed and some of the topics that keep AI researchers up at night. For example, he discussed new hardware innovations. Perhaps there is something more effective than hundreds of thousands of GPUs. Humans manage a whole brain with 12 to 25 watts after all. Neuromorphic computing, anyone? If you know, you know. If you don't, do a quick Google. Or you could ask World Labs to make a diagram of it for you, just like I did. In the public sector here in the UK, there are several neuromorphic projects going on actually, so that does make me pretty happy because I think that's the type of place we should be investing. So as we've already discussed, Stanford HAI is doing world-leading work in identifying the state of play across the AI industry and the impacts that it's having. Fei-Fei Li, being a founder of this center, is to definitely be admired. Their work on regulation, disinformation, energy, resource usage, governance, bias, racial harm is really important. And we should also mention at this point AI for all. A clear signal that Fei-Fei Li means it when she says that one of the solutions to having more humanity in AI is to have a wider representation of people building it. Again, I spoke about this a little bit more in a previous episode. Note Fei-Fei Li's responses when she is asked questions to do with gender and like being a woman in STEM. And I do want to talk about this just a little bit because I think her responses indicate maybe a similar experience to mine. And she will say things along the lines of, we all go through things, we're all individuals, we all have struggles, like there's always barriers in our way. But also as humans, like we all need agency. We all need to get clear on what we want. She makes some comments about people who are applying for jobs at World Labs and saying that young people are asking for too much out of a job. Now, it was pretty vague, and I don't know exactly what she meant by this, but I'm going to extrapolate. She may have been talking about kind of areas of interest, research focus, that type of thing, being more focused, again, staying in the lane, which is very much a pattern that she has. The more focused you are, having that North Star, something that you can guide you throughout your entire career, if you so choose. This is, her advice. But also, the reading I was getting was a bit of maybe anti-DEI initiatives or I don't know, I might have been completely wrong, but I just got a sense that she's like, we're not here to like create nice workplaces for everybody. Yeah, like I said, I might have been completely wrong. And there's other indications in her work that she's really helped people to come through, and she's raised people up. It's probably could be a mixture of the two. But yeah, when it comes to DEI, obviously, the AI Initiative for All indicates that desire to be able to include more people, but does it really show that there's an understanding of what's actually shutting a lot of people out? And this is where I think, because she can say she had everything working against her potentially, and yet she's still I rise, still she rose. Is there a sense of, if I can do it, anyone could do it, and if they don't, then they're not working hard enough, or they're not focused enough, or they're not, that's, and again, I'm not really going off much data on this, but there was just like a little sense of that I was getting from some of the answers she gave to some of the questions. I might be totally wrong, and I'd love to be proved wrong on that. One question I'm left with when it comes to World Labs is, how can a generic or horizontal technology, as Justin Johnson calls it, be judged against common ethics benchmarks? Best practice benchmarking involves evaluating the downstream utility, as in evaluating how people are actually going to use this and what are the implications of that. How do you do that if what you're providing to the world is a generic model and it's meant to be universally available for this horizontal range of use cases? Could be, an infinite number of use cases. It then falls on the domain experts and the users to ensure that there are no issues for specific use cases. But how does that work if the domain-specific people aren't used in the initial training? And also, how is this getting built into then the usability of the platform? Like, if this is what the expectation is, that it's being handed to the users to do the ethical benchmarking, then you've got to actually figure out how to build that into the user journey within the platform. Because it would be really strange to me if somebody who's been so heavily involved in human-centric AI then went, here's a tool that can work for anything, and I'm not actually responsible because I'm not the end user. One of the most consistent threads in the annual HAI index report is a documented gap between AI capability and accountability. The 2026 report found that 90% of notable AI models now exist within private companies, and those who are inside those businesses are keeping stum. That creates a black box problem for any kind of outside or independent assessment. Transparency is so important in governance, and yet the second something's built in a private entity, we have to suddenly accept that they're allowed to hide everything, even if there are implications across all our lives. Look, I get it. We were a generation brought up on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie's biggest test, how did he ultimately prove himself to Willy Wonka? By showing that he wasn't going to share his secrets. Now, it's fine. But like, is this the ultimate test of morality? For some reason, our policymakers, regulators, investors, founders seem to be afraid of this over all else. I have been actually shocked by the pushback in my networks from people who like genuinely do care about the impact of these technologies. But when I talk about transparency, they're like, no, it's not possible. Huh? It's actually such a simple solution to a lot of the challenges that we have. You don't have to share your IP. That's not what I'm saying. I'm only like simply suggesting that you should have to report on things like energy usage, on your supply chain, like where are things coming from, where's your data coming from, who is labeling that data, like what does that data worker go through when working on your products that you're making a lot of money out of. And what are the principles that you're working by, and what behaviors or proof do you have that you're sticking to those principles? Like, this isn't sharing IP, this isn't endangering your business in any way. So to like founders out there, I really don't think you should be afraid if this is the area that you're working in, or any areas actually. Shouldn't be afraid of some regulation. I mean, I know sometimes regulation goes too far. That's a whole other conversation for a whole other day. I like to be optimistic about Fei-Fei Li. Do you think she's silent on these topics because she's just hyper-focused on getting the business up and running, amongst all the other things she still does? Do you think we'll ultimately hear positive things coming out of World Labs on all of these topics? Or is it enough that she's already established positive things across the industry? Institutions that continue to do work that is helping the industry to evolve in a more positive way. Having heard all this, do you think her human-centric approach is truly human-centric? And do you think it's enough to be classed as ethical or responsible AI? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to click on the subscribe button and notification bell below so that you can see when the next and final episode in this series will drop. Thank you for listening, and I will see you soon.